Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're dissecting the massive crisis at one of the world's most iconic brands, Nike. It's a story of how a series of strategic mistakes brought an absolute giant to its knees, and we're going to break down exactly how it happened, step by step. So, at the very heart of this story is a staggering number, $28 billion. That's roughly how much value has been wiped out because of this. This isn't just a bad quarter. It's a massive financial alarm bell that something has gone fundamentally wrong inside Nike. And this quote from Scott Galloway just hits the nail on the head. It really captures the central question here. How did the brand famous for Just Do It, a company that basically defined sports and cool for decades, get so much, so wrong? It suggests a failure not just in one department, but across the entire system. So to really get our heads around this, we're going to follow a clear path. First, we'll look at the symptoms of the collapse. Then I'll introduce a really powerful framework for analysis, and we'll use it to go through the crisis step by step, from finding the real problem to figuring out why a fix is so incredibly hard. Okay, let's dive right in. Before we even get to the why, we have to look at the clear, painful symptoms of Nike's decline. Think of these as the flashing red lights on the dashboard that told the world something was seriously wrong. And wow, the data here, it tells a pretty grim story. We're talking about double-digit drops in really key areas, an 11.5% fall in revenue, and a truly shocking 20% collapse in digital sales. And remember, digital was the very channel the company bet its entire future on. And to top it all off, the stock price hit a low we haven't seen in over a decade. These are not just numbers. This is proof of a brand in serious trouble.
But, to move past these symptoms and find the actual disease, we need a proper diagnostic toolkit. We're going to use a special 4-step system analysis protocol. It's a really rigorous way to understand not just what happened, but more importantly, why.
So this framework forces you on a very disciplined journey. First, you define the real problem, not just the stuff you see on the surface. Then, you map out the entire system that created that problem. Only after you do that can you identify leverage points for change, and then finally, you stress test those solutions to see where they're going to break. It's all about being smart, not just hopeful.
All right, let's put this framework into action with Nike. Step 1. This is the most critical part. We have to separate the financial pain from where it's actually coming from. What was the underlying disease and what were just the symptoms?
And this visual of an iceberg makes it super clear. The stock plunging, the revenue dropping, that's just the tip of the iceberg. The symptoms everyone could see. The analysis shows that hidden below the surface were 3 interconnected root causes: a really flawed pivot to a direct-to-consumer model, a total collapse of their innovation pipeline, and way too much reliance on just selling old retro shoes.
And this right here gets to the heart of one of those root causes. Because they had no exciting new products, Nike's big idea was to just flood the market with more of its classic shoes. The Air Jordans and the Dunks. But here's the thing. What was once exclusive and cool became common. And that really damaged the brand's premium feel.
So these failures didn't just happen in a vacuum. To really understand them, we have to map the system that created them in the first place. Which brings us to step 2. Who were the players and what was driving their decisions?
Well, the system is this complex web of stakeholders, and they all have competing interests. You've got Nike's own executives, you've got their longtime retail partners like Foot Locker, who they pretty much just abandoned. You have these new hungry competitors like Hoka and On. And of course, you've got the athletes and consumers right in the middle of it all.
But what truly drove this whole system off a cliff wasn't just a new strategy. It was a powerful and ultimately a really flawed set of incentives that completely warped how its senior leaders made decisions.
And this is the smoking gun. Internal analysis shows that executive bonuses were directly tied to hitting digital revenue targets. This created this irresistible pressure to push direct-to-consumer sales no matter what, even if it meant destroying the healthier, more stable parts of the business and completely alienating their retail partners.
Okay, so now that we've mapped this broken system and its bad incentives, step 3 is all about finding the key leverage points, right? These are the places where a small, smart push could create a massive, positive ripple effect through the whole system. And the analysis points to 4 really clear areas. First, you've got to fix those broken relationships with wholesalers. Second, Reorganize the company internally back around specific sports, not these generic categories. Third, you have to intentionally restrict or choke the supply of those classic shoes to make them feel special again. And finally, bring back that bold, edgy, sport-focused marketing that made Nike a giant in the first place.
But fixing a system this complex is never simple, and that brings us to our final step. Step 4, breakage. This is where we have to be really ruthless and pressure test these solutions to find all the hidden risks and see exactly where they're most likely to fail.
First up, a huge breaking point. Nike can't just snap its fingers and go back to its old retail partners. And why not? Because those partners, the very stores that Nike walked away from, well, they've moved on.
The whole marketplace has fundamentally changed. As this quote says, retail shelf space is a zero-sum game. So while Nike was busy focusing on its own website, competitors like Hoka and On just rushed in and filled all that empty shelf space, building relationships and winning over customers. That space is now owned by the competition.
Okay, the second major breaking point is what's called the innovation scaling lag. So choking the supply of those popular retro shoes to make room for new stuff sounds great in theory, but it creates a massive, immediate financial risk.
And here's the trap. The whole system breaks if Nike intentionally stops selling the old shoes people actually want, before its new, unproven products are ready to sell in huge numbers. This creates this incredibly dangerous financial gap, a potential cash flow crisis, where revenue just plummets, with absolutely no guarantee the new stuff will be popular enough to fill that void in time.
So after all that, what have we learned from applying this 4-step framework to Nike's crisis? What's the big picture takeaway from this whole deep dive?
Well, the framework shows that this wasn't about just one mistake. It was a cascade of failures, a true system failure. A flawed strategy to chase digital sales, driven by bad executive incentives, basically broke the entire system. It dismantled their innovation engine, destroyed their partnerships, and weakened the brand all at once, causing their entire competitive advantage to just collapse.
And this leaves us with one last provocative question. When a brand as powerful as Nike fundamentally breaks the very system that made it successful in the first place, can that trust, with both the consumers it confused and the partners it abandoned, ever really, truly be rebuilt? That is the multi-billion-dollar question they're facing right now.